together talking about specially designed instruction. My first slide, I just want to give a little bit of a look to our division. Currently, we have a leveraging the power of community. Every Wednesday we get together at about 3:30 as a informal community and chat about all different things that are going out there with all of you. It is teacher directed. They share their information, they share their talents with us, their slides. It's been an amazing journey. It empowers us to do the work that we do. We also want to make sure that you are going and accessing. Are you hearing me?
Hey, once I get to the elliptical,
do I have volume?
We're hearing you, Jill. We're good.
Lovely. All righty. We want to make sure that we point you in the direction of the OSDE website, where we have a great deal of resources there. We also have a depository of sharing. So if you have worked and during this time of distance learning and have great ideas that are worth sharing, please upload them here, and the resource access spreadsheet is also on our webpage. So we want to reach out. Also, finally, the distance learning module that we have is on OK Edge Learning Management System. If you have not created an account within that system, I encourage you to do so. It covers all areas of special ed, all disciplines, from the core academic subjects to school safety to mindset. And then special ed, we are finding our place on that management system. We do boot camp there now, so it is the beginning. So I wanted to give you that information as we begin, and then just to point you in some directions of resources. Right now, we're going to see if your chat boxes are up and going. We're going to dust them off and take a look at these 6 pictures. Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited. Make sure that audio is off. We've got quite a bit of people joining us. So just for the sake, we have 79 attendees. And just for the sake of being able to listen, please make sure your audio is off for the time being. Thank you. Right now we have images for the week because we have Friday. Which image best describes you? Number 1 is Top Gun, Maverick, and the goose and total control of the week. It's feeling good. 2, we have problem solving from beginning to end. A good movie, keeping with reference to Top Gun, is maybe the X-Files. It just seems like you're constantly problem solving. It's from the minute you get up. 3, La La Land. Are you singing and dancing? I know Norman shared a video of teachers that are singing and dancing and engaging with their students. Is that your day? 4 is, oh goodness, putting out fires. I had to actually, putting out fires. What movie is that?
Godzilla?
Godzilla, thank you. Couldn't remember. I had to go ask my son that one. And then 5 is, it's Gone with the Toilet Paper. I emailed this to think which movie had toilet paper in it, and you could substitute anything. So Gone with the Wind, Gone with the Toilet Paper, thinking about restocking, reflecting. It can mean other things. Or, and number 6, The Shining, feeling a little bit isolated and alone. So as you're giving the temperature of your week, please put the number in the chat box. We'd love to hear and see how it went.
Yeah, that's right. If they have Google Chrome and there's
for the whole week, Jill?
Huh?
Is it for the whole week?
It's for the whole week. It's for the whole week. Yep.
Okay.
How'd your week look?
Right for Explore, though, when we launched We've Engaged, we did not get any volume at all. I had to cut and paste the link into Chrome and then
all right.
There, and that's the only way that volume.
How are we looking?
So that the trainers work.
We've got a 1 so far. I said a 6.
Yeah.
Nice. 1 Top Gun. Well done.
Wow.
Yes, well done.
And then the other thing too that was evident, and Jason brought this up. If you are going, you do have to schedule.
Got a 2. Yeah.
2.
So
Lovely. That feels like my week. All right. Lots of fun there. At least that was a temperature. We're going to move a little bit beyond here. Specially designed instruction. I am Jill Hilst. I'll be your host throughout the next hour. And Janae is manning the chat box and giving us that information. So we are here with you on this journey. This is the directive that we have, Teaching for Impact. Every thing that I hope to include in here will do one major thing, and that will grow you as a professional, and that in turn will grow our students. Today's learning goals include my hope for you and for always is that you receive meaningful information, that together we identify opportunities and methods, and we initiate the momentum for growth. So when we finish here, there's something that you can take away that's going to make what you do a little bit better. We're going to turn to our chat box again a little bit and take a force field analysis. And what I want you to think about before we continue on is, what are the internal things that happen in your school, in your district, or external forces that push toward the capacity or your ability to provide rigorous and relevant instruction for all students, including students with disabilities? So thinking about your smaller environment, what do you have control over internally, or not necessarily those external things that you control that allow for great instruction to happen?
Hey, Jill, give me just 1 minute. Is the person on the phone with you? Jill Hilst? Is the person on the phone behind you?
Is the person on the phone behind
Yeah.
me?
No? Okay.
Oh, yes. Yes. I apologize.
Nope, that's all right.
I share an office with my husband, and like Janae's husband,
Nope.
life goes
I
on.
understand. Okay.
Life happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, I hear somebody. I think that might be Vince.
It's Vince. And as much as we try to coordinate schedules, it just doesn't seem to.
Hey, Gary, I'm sorry. I do have a question.
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
everybody able to select everyone for the chat box, or is it
Right now, it's going just to you.
just to me?
Are
Okay.
you're seeing the chat though?
I'm seeing it. Yes. We just had a question about, someone says that the chat box lets them pick of us at a time.
Yeah, we're doing that for safety.
Okay. Okay. I just want to make sure that I wasn't missing something. Okay. Good job.
All right. Are we getting into responses? Anything coming through?
Let's see here. You may want to go over that one again. Not so far.
All right. Well, now you're thinking about it. Here on the force field analysis, when we do an analysis, we look at the two entities that are pushing towards the ability to do something and the ability, and then pushing against it. And we'll move on, but I do want you to think about that or reflect on what gets in the way. What gets in the way of that instruction towards building the capacity to serve our students. And that's kind of the mind frame that we're going to work with today. Our agenda is to tackle specially designed instruction, opportunities for that, results-driven accountability, and community. And those are the 4 elements of our time together. Without a good question, a good answer has no place to go. Let's give that a try. I include riddles with my students for this reason, that riddles are inferences, or they're ambiguous. They're not full of the information that is needed. And oftentimes students who struggle with a learning disability has a difficult time going from a concrete learner into an abstract learner. So riddles are a great opportunity in your day to plug in those skill sets. So here it is. As I was going to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. Each wife had 7 sacks. Each sack had 7 cats. Each cat had 7 kits. Kits, cats, sacks, and wives. How many were going to St. Ives? It's not full of explicit information. You're not going to find the answers here. And oftentimes we need to talk students into understanding what they're looking for. Background knowledge, experience, and it was just one. We know as we journey into special ed, just a brief overview is this. Special ed is free, appropriate public education, providing access to general education, meeting the grade level standards, and conforming to the IEP. The child receives meaningful and measurable educational benefits And that is more important now than ever. FAPE and special education took a strong stance on that measurable and meaningful benefit in 2017 in March with the Andrew case. It requires teachers to use the greatest extent possible scientific or evidence-based practices. For those of you who are in transitional or your secondary from 8th grade on, you'll recognize that our focus is always on education, employment, independent living, and community participation. So we are focused on those 4 beacons. It is individualized to meet the needs of the students where they are, not predetermined of what the needs of the school or the district are. And specially designed instruction is a part of the language of IDEA. It is related services, and it's provided at no cost to the parent. So that's where we are today. We provide those services across a spectrum or a continuum of alternative placements based on the story that the data tells us of a student. This is primarily the last decision that is made as we unwrap all of the student needs, and it typically doesn't live in a bubble. One size does not fit all. It could be, it's organic. Hannah's experience replacement may be a math deficit, and her day is spent generally in special ed with accommodations. But in math class, she gets the support of co-teaching. Rabbi's placement is a little bit different, a little bit more involved, maybe a reading and math deficit area. And so his specialized instruction looks quite a bit different and divided differently throughout the day. And this is Caper's story. Yes. When I was a second-year teacher, Caper came into our school. In 5th grade, the summer of 5th grade for Caper, he and his brother broke a lock on a business or a gas tank on kind of an abandoned business type of thing. And unfortunately, he pulled out the gas pump and sprayed it all over the building. The gas met a pilot light and it blew up Caper. He spent 2 years outside of the educational environment. He was in Illinois. And they life flighted him to Texas, where he spent a year there in the burn unit and then back in Illinois for another year. He joined our school. My specialty was orthopedically impaired, with 52 people present during the initial IEP meeting. It was a transition from clinical services or related services into educationally directed services. So we wrote his IEP. His specially designed instruction was meant to guarantee his access into the academic realm. It relied heavily on understanding the academic needs and the relationship that we had with our related services. So his instruction was uniquely designed for Caper. He is an author. He goes to, this is Bird Camp, but he wrote a book back in 2017 called Uncharted Soul. It's worth a read. It's fun to find yourself in a story, but it begins back when he joined our class. The elements, the fundamentals of specially designed instruction are these. They're delivered in an intentional or direct and carefully monitored manner by customizing changes to the content, methodology, and instruction based on the student's need. The intent of specially designed instruction is to accelerate child progress beyond instruction provided in general education alone. It is a partnership. Specially designed instruction occurs within an MTS framework, and accommodations, including pacing, grading, assignments, or testing structures, do not constitute specially designed instruction alone.
If you want to go and see who actually you contacted.
When we unpack specially designed instruction, we can identify specific elements of that. Today, we are going to cover 6 of those. We could add to the list. the resource that I have encourages us to add to a specially designed instruction because that's what it is. But we focus on know and share data, the explicit or direct instruction, interventions, metacognition, practice and feedback, and peer tutoring and student collaboration. We're going to take a look at those as we journey. The most important single factor influencing learning is what the learner already knows. Ascertain this and teach accordingly. This is data. I encourage you to use the chat box. I know it's a beautiful day, and hopefully you're just sitting back and enjoying the information and the visuals and being in your safe home. But there is a question that's important. How well do you know your students' data? And you can elaborate. How well do you know it? Is it because during your PLC at the beginning of the school year, you unpack the state assessments and categorize and look at troubled areas or focus points? Are you an interventionist? And this is really where you live? Is your data, your grades, and your standards, mastery? How well do you know your data and how often are you looking at it? How are we doing, Janae?
So far we have, I know more on some than others, which, yes, that I would agree with that.
There it is. So these are all my Oklahoma pharmacies, and I can see how much.
The window that I see, just as an outsider, not knowing your story in Eufaula, and not knowing your story as a teacher or a principal or an administrator. This is what we see when we open up that door on the state report card. There's an overview of where you end. And I put on here summative assessment because this is the end of the road. There's no more time to take a look at this data and adjust to it. You'll see what we see. And again, it's not the full story. It's not the story that you moved Johnny because of tutoring every day, the blood, sweat, and tears that go behind these numbers that are the real successes. But all of the same, this is the window that we see when the public goes in and does a search. But when we look at the data, these are the areas that we focus or must focus, and it is the formative assessments, the tools that are created in order for us to make decisions, really. The universal screener is really the beginning. I looked on the website to see if there was a universal screener that Eufaula provided as a district. And you may, and so if you are, you know just where this is. Universal screening typically happens 3 times a year. They're the seasonal formative assessments. They begin typically in September, in the fall. Sometimes people push it into August, and then again in the winter. And then we have another spring formative assessment. The tools that are familiar would be STAR, MAP, or NWEA, Ames Web Plus. DIBBLES are often used for these universal screeners. I am from Illinois. We are an RTI state, and it is mandated to have universal screeners to be able to take a look at student growth. Our evaluation at that time, it still is, but it is a law, it's called the PARA-law, where a certain percentage of our evaluation is based on data that is found within the universal screeners and the growth of all of our students. So there's a huge emphasis on our formative assessments. We use that data, but not alone, to identify the needs of a student, the intervention planning or placement. And we make data decisions on that instruction. I live as a special education teacher typically in problem-solving teams of tier 3, where we constantly are looking at that information and that data. Oftentimes it is the universal screeners and even the intervention placement screeners. We don't begin to really unfold or look at the patterns until we have 5 data points. So it is important that this is a focus, that we're constantly looking at the pattern of learning. The placement decisions are often, we're very, very lucky if we have wonderful interventions that incorporate placement assessments and will provide a plan that has a great deal of fidelity in it for each student. Throughout the way, you have progress monitoring, determining how adequate our instruction is, and then oftentimes after we've had all of this evidence-based instruction, we've evaluated it, we've talked as a team, we've changed our interventions based on the information. Sometimes the formative assessment will have to be a diagnostic evaluation to determine our next steps. From experience and from research, it is imperative for screening to occur for all children, not just the ones at risk or who have already been determined to have reading failure. Time is of the essence. Early intervention is key. Research has shown that the brain plasticity decreases through childhood. It takes 4 times as long to intervene in 4th grade as it does in kindergarten. I have taught from pre-K all the way through high school, but a great deal of my emphasis has been on middle school. By the time students in 4th grade, we have 4 times the amount. It can grow to 5 times the amount. The energy that is needed for a student to do the extra work in order to make up for lost learning is an amazing feat. What we are asking of our students in order to make up a gap, the energy, and we are limited in resources, in time, opportunity. So the earlier, the better. I wanted to put up here really the value. This is the STAR report, one of the STAR report. And STAR is a universal screener, progress monitor from Renaissance. And it provides, this is information that would typically be a student who would be in a problem-solving team, potentially tier 3, if not in special education. The student is in 3rd grade. He's in the 1st percentile ranking. Typically on a STAR assessment, we want to see that golden space is 25% between 75%. That's your average, your low average and your high average. So we look at that percentile rank and we know where our target is. Oftentimes when we have quality universal screeners, it will produce the information that we need, the instructional level, where they are, and where we believe would be ideal to begin when you identify 3rd grade standards and where the student is. Here, Kaylee would be best served by instructional materials prepared at the pre-kindergarten level. So there's a lot of work to be done. And what that will look like based on information and based on data is specially designed for Kaylee. This is your intervention. I bring that up for attributes. Although STAR is a quality program that I have used, I've used MAP, I've used Ames Web, I've used EasyCBM, DIBBLS. I bring them up and show them only for the attributes and the contribution that they make to decision making, not as an endorsement. Those decisions are made locally by districts and your classroom. But as we move into quality interventions, this is a beautiful program used for silent reading rates. So typically, it begins at 3rd grade, where students have phonetics, word attack skills, basic reading skills at 3rd grade level and on up. This goes up through high school. What it does is has the ability to calibrate fluency in silent reading and comprehension. But more importantly, it creates a learning environment for students to understand how to do that, how to create a fluency or a rate of reading that can lead to comprehension and then building on that. For example, in 7th grade, a silent reading rate that we target is 205 words per minute at 80% comprehension rate. At 8th grade, it would be 212 words per minute at 80% comprehension rate. That's what we want. Those are your average readers. Those are your successful readers. And that's always what this program does. It gives us that opportunity, but more importantly, it also is testing every day without really assessing. Students aren't going on there and taking a STAR assessment that's identified as truly assessment. They're doing the work and playing the games and going into this algorithm. And I, as an administrator, access into kind of the behind the curtain, can see their progress every day in real time. It's very, very valuable to have these. The elementary, maybe Wilson is a good, I know SRA has been used to tackle some of those reading programs. This is Moby Max, and I included this as one of those attributes that has a broad spectrum of disciplines and core subject areas. It's not just a reading, it's not just a math. And the data that you have is valuable and worth noting. It has full class, you can identify students, but the information that you have in order to form your instruction for students is necessary. Moby Max is typically free or very cheap, where a Reading Plus would be quite a bit more expensive. But what do we do with that data? This is the accommodation grid that I make for all of my teachers that serve students who have IEPs. It's a grid, it's easy to read, as opposed to even an IEP at a glance, so that the teachers understand really what is going on. And at the very end, if you'll see in the circled area, whatever information that I can provide for that general education teacher that needs to know this student, I add. So on the very end, at that time, which is at the very beginning of the year, I know that the reading grade equivalency, I have that. So this is 7th grade, and at a glance, teachers can understand where that student is entering that skill. Also, the Reading Plus, I reach out at the very beginning of the year and ask for a pilot, and typically they give a free pilot up through until I can talk my way into longer and longer. Here we were able to have a free pilot with Reading Plus, so I was able to identify the silent reading fluency rates. This is 7th grade, and that is a very important number to have. You'll see that we're wanting 205. That's the key reading fluency rate and where those students fall, with a comprehension rate of 80%. So it is slow, and the quicker, it lends itself to understanding the accommodations. It tells that story. Why is there additional time needed? Because the student is reading at a slower level and needs to in order to comprehend the information. Whatever else, yes.
Lots of people are asking if you have that grid and if it is shareable.
I will send it.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Well, good, I'm glad you like that.
Thanks, Sarah, for the expletive. That made it more
After the data, we've got it. We have our story. And what underlying prior knowledge must students possess? Because what we're going to unpack is the gap, is the instructional level. And we begin to ask ourselves, how do we build this success story? How might the concepts and skills within a standard be sequenced in a logical way to fill those gaps? And the best visual that I have is this. I shared standard-based learning with a board of directors a couple of years ago, and a school, not the district, was actually going standard-based grading. And I wanted to really show the opportunity that identifying standards and instructional levels, where those students are entering that standard at a grade level. Teaching 8th grade, you'll see that is my target. That is the general education target. But there's a lot of information in there that will need to be included that we can't assume the student knows. If you unpack this standard alignment in 4th grade, late elementary, you begin to understand that that's still a concrete skill set.
Yes.
We begin to introduce some figurative language, but not yet. So a student that is in 8th grade, with the data that we understand of that student, his instructional level, he's entering that standard at a very concrete learning skill. And so we have to understand where that student is and what is needed. We begin to introduce similes and metaphors in 5th grade following that alignment. And we build on that into analogies and allusions in the text. So there's a long journey that that student takes, but understanding what that looks like for that student is valuable. This is what I give my teachers. It is really the unpacking of the standards. Although that one is a visual, this is really the key. When we take a standard, I'm unpacking it. My student is my verb. The educator is what it is that we are providing for that student. And you'll see more clearly those depths of knowledge elements to it. If you're looking at the 4th grade standard on that alignment, we are asking the student or measuring their ability to describe. For my depths of knowledge in 5th grade, we're distinguishing and making use, supporting and understanding. Still pretty basic. Until we get into our 6th grade, we begin to analyze. The depth of knowledge increases. Analyzing and making and drawing conclusions and logic. When you unpack that standard, you realize where that student is in just description and where we need to take them and what it will take to get there. But we do it within the framework of the evidence-based practices and best practices. And I point always, if there's one resource to use, and I sent Michelle one of Hattie's grids, and he has many, they change. He has been doing meta-analysis for 20 years, over 20 years. He doesn't do the research, he collects the research. And from all of the research, he puts them in order according to effect size. And effect size means this, how well it affects the growth of the student. Point 4, effect size means that that strategy affects the student or should grow the student for 1 year. And you'll see something like cooperative learning is a 0.4 effect size. It is just on target. We want a year's growth in a year's time. That's really our bar. Anything above that are our big rocks, those things that we keep wanting to look at and to incorporate into our instruction. To understand this, we look at the biggest rock, and it is collective teacher efficacy. And we need to understand that together, staff's shared ideas, that together you will change students, that the outcomes will be positive and you have what it takes. has 1.57 effect size, multiple years, just by having a team that together, you know that you can make a difference. As we begin to look farther into specially designed instruction, student expectations, what to expect from students, having high expectations, 1.44 effect size. Remember that 0.4 is 1 year. When you're above that, these are big numbers by sometimes just small changes. Response to intervention, formative teacher evaluation, feedback, metacognition, and direct instruction. Those are all key elements to specially designed instruction. And those are the top dogs. When we think about that, it's always a reflection that best practices or evidence-based practices that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that when we do it with fidelity, it will move the needle of our students. But best practices do not pay off until they have been implemented and fine-tuned in short-term reflective cycles. Such efforts need to become the norm, the stuff of a new, more professional culture of experimentation in teaching. And think to yourself, what gets in the way of this? What gets in the way of being able to take something that looks like it is going to win and being able to practice and reflect? And sometimes it doesn't win every day. We know that. Having taught for 20 years, every day isn't a home run. And so having the opportunity to step back, reflect on it, and try it again, and know that with fidelity and with practice, it can grow our students.
I was wondering too about yours.
Explicit instruction is one of the key elements to specially designed instruction. Intentional learning, being able to identify what the student is missing and we fill it. Instruction is focused on the critical content, the skills, the strategies, vocabulary, terms, concepts, and rules supporting future learning needs. Easier skills before harder skills, high frequency skills before low frequency skills, prerequisites first. For those of you who are reading teachers, you understand this. Math, you understand this. We know third grade, we're just introducing multiplication. We're going from strong automaticity in math and addition and subtraction. We start to introduce multiplication. And if we have enough time in third grade, we're starting that division. And so we're adding, we know these prerequisites in these skills. Complex skills and strategies are broken down into smaller, obtainable instructional units. What can that look like? The International Dyslexia Association had this, and I thought it would really, if we needed a visual to just go show you what I had just said, this is really it. All of the complex pieces of a whole, all of the parts of reading that intertwine, that separately are important as they are together. And it's a constant increasing process that we learn. We're going to take it at targets, and I'm going to bring you through a lesson, but it's really just part of a lesson to incorporate or understand filling those gaps with certain skills when our target is at grade level. And we understand that we have students who are entering our classroom that are not at grade level, and there are gaps, and how to fill that and how to look at it without it being multiple lesson plans. Although there's a place for that direct instruction or individuality, but in a whole, we can look at it in a variety of ways. But here are my two standards that I'm focusing on. Analyze text and ideas within and between text and provide textual evidence to support inferences, and compare and contrast the effectiveness of a variety of written, visual, digital, nonverbal, and interactive text to generate and answer literal, interpretive, and applied questions to create new understandings. Those are my standards for my students. And my day begins like this. Students will come in And what happened on this day in my classroom on April 4th, in 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated. The civil rights activist is killed by James Earl Ray, a segregationist, received a 99-year prison sentence, and he died in 1998. From that information, I do a little bit of research. The information that I found is just after 6 p.m. on April 4th. This passage within the whole is rich with concrete information. It has dates, it has characters, it has who's and what's and where's. It is the concrete basic skills of building. Prerequisites before more complex. And so just by introducing, just by that bell work, just by understanding where my students need to come into that concept, I begin here. And this is their work. They summarize a passage. Because I know that the multiple levels of students are coming in at about a second grade level. Those that I'm targeting with an IEP. And then there is the next passage. And the next passage is rich with inferencing. It is rich with symbolism. And it is the same story. On April 3rd, back in Memphis, King gave his last sermon. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter because I've been to the mountaintop and I've been to the promised land. And we may not go there together. Within the next 10 minutes, my students are analyzing and inferencing, going from concrete to a more, to this inferencing skill of more figurative language.
Of course, you're right.
On April 18th, 2019, on this date, San Francisco, California was devastated by an earthquake in 1906. And the information that I want my students to do is to compare and contrast 2019 to 1906.
Also, you can watch the stuff.
But there is never an assumption made. I know that if this is something that I gave them, it would be very difficult for them to understand. So we go back to the very basics and we use media and primary sources to build their knowledge. This is 11 minutes of Market Street on April 14th in 1906. Building background knowledge and information that is needed to move forward is imperative. So always in the back of our minds, we're filling the gap. We're making sure that the student understands. They have the information necessary and needed. And in this instance, in order to compare or contrast two dates, I need to give them Market Street in 1906. And it really does have sound. It's just not going. To review, hopefully this is what we covered. Closing the gap, we provide clear and appropriately challenging targets. We enhance commitment to those targets. We change the standard that meets instructional needs. We've identified it based on the data. We know where students are entering that standard on the instructional level, and we increase effort that leads to tackling more challenging work. And this is really sometimes, yes, it's a little bit more reflective. How often do you take the risk of setting goals that you have no idea how to attain? Food for thought. To equip today's students for the future, we need to understand the fundamental building blocks of complex skills. And this is Aiden's story. Aiden here, he is a member of the Germantown Hills cross-country team. Aiden is a brother, he's a son, he has a dog named Sam. He was the cutest little English bulldog that you ever did see. And he also has autism. He's also a very important member of the cross-country team. And the goal that was set out for Aiden was to run the course, to run the 2-mile course that all other cross-country members would run. Not to shrink it, not to modify it, but to accommodate it. And so that was the goal, to get him from the beginning to the end. And so the plan was this. The coach, who just happens to be a special education teacher, so there's a shout out to that, came up with a plan. Aiden would run in the open race. And prior to that is the varsity race. So there's there's many runners that have already been run, and they were chosen to periodically along the course strategically be placed so that one runner would start the race with Aiden and keep him focused on the race. And as he was running, they would trade off. The first runner that you see in the picture to the left would run off of the course, and a new runner would run on to the course. This was the plan until they got Aiden to the end of the race and across the finish line. If you look in the middle, you'll see what really happened when the stakeholders had a say in it. The race began with one runner assisting Aiden. As the trade-off was to happen, the runner that was assisting Aiden initially never ran off. She stayed on to continue to assist. And now we have 2 people assisting. When it gets a little bit harder, the support was growing. As we went, those 2 didn't fall off, and they ran, and a 3rd came on, and a 4th came on, and nobody left Aiden along the course as everyone grew tired. As the journey gets longer and harder, and we want to quit, his support system grew. He didn't have one person wasn't passing him off. When they were done with him, they stuck with him. Until at the very end, if you look at the picture on the right, not only did Aiden have his team with him, but he had multiple teams cross the finish line with him and push him in the end. I would call that tier 3, when the going gets really, really difficult and we really want to stop doing it. It wasn't one person that held the tether to keep him talking about oscillating fans. It was really teamwork. It was really the multi-tiered system of supports at its finest. And we know that it's built in. The intensive interventions that are key to identifying specially designed instruction at a direct level is a process, and it is not a program. So when I pointed out programs, those are the programs that I have used and found attributes that I find to be important, but it is a process. And I'm going to move on here to point that out. This is a system of one of the schools that I was at and developed there. This is literally tier 3. This is the most intense level, and you'll see that within this intervention protocol, multiple programs within that process. Front row math is now Freckle, so if you, that's where students for math would be, would start. There would be kind of the protocol or the process or the fidelity in place of what that would take underneath it. But if a student wasn't succeeding, then we had processes in place. We could bring a student to IXL Math and begin to make a more specialized instruction for him in that area. Or if there wasn't success in that, we had the option of a touch math, which is a much more hands teacher directed small group program. We did the same for the reading. Reading Plus was where students started, But once we were able to look at their data and establish success rates, if we needed to, we could change it. And we changed it to Lexia strategies. Reading Plus, you had to have a 3rd grade reading skills. You had to have those word attack skills. If they weren't there, we had Lexia strategies, which is a more Gillingham processed system. And if that wasn't working, then we had prescriptive reading programs like Wilson for students to go to. So it was not a program. Tier 3 or interventions weren't programs, they were processes. And when we were looking at the data, we had some decisions that we could make based on it. Without an and, this is the information and this is what we're going to do. Sometimes we fall flat in identifying the specially designed instruction for students. No Red Ink, I wanted to point out, it's free and it's grammar related, but to the right, this is creations or individualized instruction that I had the capability of creating within this system. Students, some students had this to do, other students had something completely different to do. And they would go into the system and work on capitalization. The information on No Red Ink gave me real-time information and data that I could go into and see where they were successing and see where I needed to tweak that information. Which is amazingly valuable for me. It is not easy. The students go in, they create their account based on their interests. So the grammar activities are based on things that are important to them, but it can be individualized and we move forward. IXL, we used more for math, but it is math and ELA. And I point this out as well. If you are able to buy the program, it has placement assessments. It puts them where they want. It builds the fidelity within that program to identify success. And we know that that's important. All of the research is done on the proof that if done this way for this long in this environment, will create these results. And oftentimes we lack some resource, whether it is time to completely follow that the fidelity. So we tweak and we change and we make the best that we can. These programs are that way. We can go in there, we can identify, much like No Red Ink, IXL, I can go into a level and create a pathway for students to succeed.
On your side, so I don't think it'd be an issue. Yeah. Yeah, I think.
And we know that metacognition, which is really getting unstuck, giving students the skills and the abilities to think through their thinking, because getting stuck is going to happen. And with students who have gaps in their learning, it happens more than we wish it to happen. And what we need to develop within that is their metacognitive skills. And that is simply finding pathways, resources to direct them towards their own self-advocacy of getting unstuck, because that's key when you're filling the gap, when it's 4 times more difficult to bridge the gap, 4 times more difficult or 5 times more difficult to do the work to take to get to that grade level target. And so some of the resources that I have used are things that you are using. Unpacking the text, we use the Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech in 6th grade. So we're not, for me, I love using difficult or not difficult, but very relevant passages and then unpacking them to meet the needs of those students. So here we unpacked the I Have a Dream speech with these skills to help get unstuck, highlighting, annotating the text, boxing words that are confusing, finding symbols. What symbol does he use to express what America owes to the African American citizen? Place a square around the proof. We're really doing some close reading, but we are teaching skills that lead to not getting stuck or feeling frustrated or feeling overwhelmed. We are taking it one step at a time. On the other side, we're just looking at the words. I use a lot of color coding for metacognitive skills that students can highlight words that are used often when we're determining key elements, what's being said, when we're unpacking things like that. But for students, looking at the opportunities of assistive technology is key, and having it there so it doesn't feel like they're stuck. It feels like it's an option that is available to them to move beyond feeling frustrated. And so many things are built in. And this feels a little bit outdated because for the last 6 weeks, we've really had to learn this, forced learning of what assistive technology can identify. But most importantly, we have integrated within the Word document structure. We have read alouds. We also have check accessibility. Did you know that Oklahoma has the leading Girl Scout cookie seller? So just a shout out to that. We found that passage that we used for 18,000 cookies. So kudos to Oklahoma. Another key element is this. What happens when we have metacognition is that students have requirements to meet, but understanding their individuality of diving into something. This is reading a passage. But in blue, the students that I know are at a first grade reading level, that is what they have to read. The blue and green are students that are capable of more. There might be a blue and a green and an orange, but when we have oral reading fluency or partner reading, oftentimes I'll color code. And when possible, I will use the primary source for a text-to-speech opportunity to understand and to hear the dialect and how that passage is to be read in fluency, in projection, in emotion. So this speech at 4 minutes and 37 seconds begins, but we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. And it is said by Martin Luther King himself. So don't overlook those opportunities as well. Closed caption. For those of us who process information, it is not only there for hearing impairment, it is there for the value of really understanding the holistic approach to providing information. And virtual, more so not, and some generations I literally needed to go and ask my son what the name of his virtual program was, the Vibe. But these are opportunities, and I say this, Nearpod is really where I have this picture. And Nearpod is a program that you can go into. Some of the programs are free. You go in there and they call them virtual, but it's really panoramic. If you want to go to a national park, they have this, and it shows picture after picture and video of panoramic views of national parks, of places that maybe the underserved would never get to, or maybe those with significant needs may never have an opportunity to visit. We bring them here. We have this ability now. I have gone to Mount Everest. I have climbed the mountain because of the Vibe. I have been to places. I actually came to Oklahoma long before I physically arrived here because I was able to visit virtually from Google World. If you have this opportunity to bring these experiences to your students, to expand on their knowledge, it is an amazing opportunity that I can't express how important that is. We only remember what we think about and keep thinking about. And so, summing up what we just experienced with metacognition is that we create a climate that encourages learning from trial and error. We do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And I'm going to go a little bit faster because I want to be very, I want to honor your time. And so I'm going to go a little bit faster here. But here we know that when we look at something, what do we expect from our students? How will we know when they learn it? How will we respond when some students don't learn it? And how will we respond when some students already know it? And here's your story of the 12-year-old Katie Francis cooking. Rereading with intention has a 0.79 effect size. And so often I take a passage because I have to identify that I'm not just wanting the student to understand the passage, I want them to develop fluency in the passage. So my passage goes through a whole week. I started with peer reading. They have a rubric of all of the activities that one passage will measure. And it will be writing skills and grammar skills and parts of speech skills. We will tackle that one passage with all of these so that we're not constantly, I'm identifying exactly what is being measured as opposed to fluency. If I'm not identifying exactly what I want to measure, then oftentimes I'm measuring how well they can read something. And so using a rubric to identify, and I want my students to be at mastery. If I know that they're strong, we work on exemplar. We move it up a little bit, but they do not need to have 100%. I tell them this right now, that you don't have to be perfect to be proficient. And so we know that we approach, students will fill this in as we go until we get here. If they need a challenge, we move across. We unpack it with nouns, and then we break it apart with who, what, when, where, why, and how. We use the same passage over and over again, identifying something different. Assessments, chunking. When you're dividing it against a standard or a skill, have the opportunity for a student to bank an area. I put the green X over something because they nailed it. They're proficient. They've met 80% of it. It's the other areas that they need to work on. Banking an area because they know that information and the rest of it is left for mastery or proficiency level. And they're following the progression. And provide feedback timely in a way that develops their skills. And students are taught to reflect, interpret, and use feedback. These steps are more important than focusing on how much feedback is provided. Feedback given and not heard is of little use. It is a myth that educators must provide extensive content alterations because they have an inclusive classroom. Much of what works well for students with specially designed instruction also works well for all students.
I don't see her.
Thanks everybody.
Okay, she said.
Yep, got it.
Jill,
Yes.
I think that this is a good time to address this question maybe. Someone was asking about co-teaching.
Yes.
If you, I didn't know if you were going to dive into that today or not, or if you wanted to.
That's for
a minute.
That's for another day. Yes.
Okay.
We did typically on a longer version of this, co-teaching is put inside. We delve a little bit more in explicit, but for the sake of a beautiful day on a Friday morning, if we want to come back and look at co-teaching in this model, I would love it. I am an inclusive proponent and have done that for many years. So we would love to dive into that, but great question. If we had time, we dive into that area. And we know that the greatest asset of school is its people. And for another day, Nick's story, I'll give you a little bit of a teaser. I met Nick on the top of his mother's car walking walking into school in the morning. Nick came from St. Jude Catholic School. He had open heart surgery and developed complications and a severe anxiety disorder. And Sister Christina, who is a lovely, wonderful principal for that school, pointed in the direction of the public school where there was special education and said, I think this is where you need to be. And his story is one of community, one of professionalism, one of specially designed instruction, of 1 hour in school, passing out and running out of the building to the very last day. We said goodbye because of his success. He was going back to his beloved St. Jude and his friends. So it's a success story, but we can delve into that. And we do know that now more than ever, that these are the key elements of our world: strength and support and safety and trusting and commitment to learning and a part of a larger group. And each year I challenge my students to define this. And this is one example. They build posters, they come up with their mottos, and they work as a team together to work through what a year will feel like. I gave Michelle this, and in the end, it's a reflection piece to take a look at your goals. Maybe there was one, maybe it was a form that you saw or a grid that looked fantastic, and maybe that is your goal. Where's your reality? It's hard, time, your options, and your way forward. And so you have this. I encourage you to take it, unpack something that you find valuable and important along the way. And that was quick. I hope we have another day that we can dive into something specifically. Any questions out there before we send you on your